Episode 26, Kirtland goes dry before blowing up. Welcome back to Hidden and Distorted History of the Church, where we uncover the lesser-known truths about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons. My goal is to reveal the authentic historical facts behind the Mormon Church. Recap. Last time, we exposed the need for God to supposedly give Joseph Smith a third revelation about the location of Zion. We also visited the story of Elijah Abel, one of the first African Americans to hold a position of authority in the church, until Brigham Young stripped him of his priesthood. And we uncovered how Smith tried his hand at predicting the Civil War, only to fall flat, proving he lacked any real prophetic power. This week, we dive into the true origins of the word of wisdom, revealing it as a man-made initiative rather than divine command. We'll also explore Oliver Cowdery's scandalous affair, Joseph Smith's secret relationship with Fanny Alger, and much more. Don't miss this eye-opening episode. You won't want to miss these shocking revelations. Part 1. The Temperance Society and the Word of Wisdom. What was the Temperance movement, and how did it impact the early Church of Christ? In the late 17th century, alcohol was central to colonial life in North America. Hard cider, in particular, was a staple drink, with families consuming barrels each year. Orchards were so important that settlers often had to plant apple trees to secure land titles. However, as the Industrial Revolution progressed in the late 18th century, attitudes toward alcohol shifted. The need for sober workers in the now industrialized world sparked the global temperance movement into the 1800s, a movement that would profoundly influence the Church of Christ and its teachings. The temperance movement didn't start with a goal to ban all alcohol. It simply aimed to reduce consumption. Poor water quality and limited access to milk, which carried risks of bacterial poisoning without pasteurization, made alcoholic beverages safer options. Coffee and tea were luxuries few could afford. Alcohol was, in fact, essential for survival. However, over time, the movement shifted toward banning all spirits and eventually even beer and wine. One of their unfounded claims was that alcohol hindered scientific progress, when in reality, it kept people alive in a world of poor sanitation. So what does the temperance movement have to do with the church? On February 1st, 1833, the Temperance Society of Ohio succeeded in shutting down the distilleries in Kirtland and Mentor, making both communities dry. Less than a month later, on February 27th, after Emma pressured Joseph, he conveniently received a revelation from God on the word of wisdom, mirroring the rules of the Temperance Society. While Joseph Smith supported temperance, he never pushed for full abstinence. According to scholars like Paul H. Peterson and Ronald W. Walker, Smith resisted enforcing strict alcohol bans because he believed it infringed on individual agency and could divide the church. Yet some LDS historians have attempted to paint Smith as a teetotaler, despite testimonies from his contemporaries that he drank openly in Kirtland and more freely in Nauvoo. An interesting tidbit from Mormon Matters highlights Smith's contradictions. Amasa Lyman, a member of the First Presidency, shared that Joseph often tested the faith of the saints. One such example: after preaching passionately about the word of wisdom, Joseph was seen riding through Nauvoo, smoking a cigar. What does the church say? Brigham Young himself reveals the truth. When they assembled together in this room after breakfast, the first thing they did was to light their pipes and, while smoking, talk about the great things of the kingdom, and spit all over the room, and as soon as the pipe was out of their mouths, a large chew of tobacco would then be taken. Often, when the prophet Joseph Smith entered the room to give the school instructions, he would find himself in a cloud of tobacco smoke. This, and the complaints of his wife at having to clean so filthy a floor, made the prophet think upon the matter, and he inquired of the Lord relating to the conduct of the elders in using tobacco, and the revelation known as the Word of Wisdom was the result of his inquiry. Brigham Young, Journal of Discourses, Vol. 12 p. 158. This wasn't divine revelation. This was Joseph caving to Emma's pressure and responding to a filthy tobacco-filled room. The church is lying about how the word of wisdom was truly received. It wasn't even enforced as a commandment until 1851, when Brigham Young proposed it, and even then, it didn't gain serious weight until the 20th century when it became tied to temple recommend requirements. If this was truly a revelation from God, why didn't Joseph enforce it when the Temperance Society was pushing for a dry state? Why did it take until the 1900s to become a core requirement for temple entry? Because it wasn't a revelation. It was Joseph once again wielding his influence and power and enjoyed his drink and cigars. I could easily dedicate an entire video to this topic alone. If you're interested in diving deeper into the truth behind the word of wisdom, drop a comment below and let me know. I'll be sure to make a full video breaking it all down. Part 2, the Joseph Smith translation Misrepresentation. A day after the Kirtland and Mentor distilleries were shut down, Joseph Smith made another bold move. No, it wasn't the word of wisdom we discussed earlier, but the so-called translation of the Bible he and Sidney Rigdon had been working on, stating it had been completed. However, this was not a true translation. It was a revision designed to strengthen their authority over the members of the Church of Christ. Joseph even inserted himself into Scripture with the verse, "His name shall be called Joseph, and it shall be after the name of his father." Conveniently, no Hebrew manuscripts, including the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest complete biblical texts we possess, contain this verse. Smith's audacity in manipulating Scripture to elevate his status knew no bounds. I've covered the Joseph Smith translation JST in a previous video, but here we are again, and it's worth diving a bit deeper. Not only did Joseph and Sidney fail to truly translate the Bible, but they also plagiarized the work of biblical scholar Adam Clarke. This wasn't just a minor overlap. BYU professor Thomas Wayment found substantial evidence of direct copying. Wayment stated, "We discovered that in about 200 to 300 parallels, Joseph Smith has the exact same changes to a verse that Adam Clarke does. They're verbatim. Some of them are 5 to 6 words, some are 2 words, and some a single word. It seemed pretty obvious that he's getting this from Adam Clarke." Smith wasn't translating the Bible. He was stealing from Clarke and calling it revelation. Smith and Rigdon's plagiarism of Adam Clarke's work is so blatant that it's caused a divide even among BYU historians and scholars. The evidence is overwhelming, yet the church's apologists scramble to defend Joseph Smith. Take Kent P. Jackson, a BYU professor who outright disagrees with his colleague Thomas Wayment. Jackson claims, "I have studied closely the Wayment article and the Wayment and Wilson Lemon article and their proposed connections between Clarke's commentary and Joseph Smith. I have examined in detail every one of the JST passages they set forth as having been influenced by Clarke, and I have examined what Clarke wrote about those passages. I now believe that the conclusions they reached regarding those connections cannot be sustained. I do not believe that there is Adam Clarke JST connection at all, and I have seen no evidence that Joseph Smith ever used Clarke's commentary in his revision of the Bible. None of the passages that Wayment and Wilson Lemon have set forward as examples, in my opinion, can withstand careful scrutiny. But how is it possible that 2 scholars from the same religious institution, both considered experts on the Joseph Smith translation, come to completely different conclusions? They're looking at the same evidence, yet one sees clear plagiarism while the other denies it exists entirely. It speaks to the church's desperation to maintain the illusion of Smith's prophetic authority, even when the evidence of his manipulation and deceit is staring them in the face. We know for a fact that Smith and Rigdon had access to Adam Clarke's commentary, as Thomas Wayment provides further evidence. We started to look back through the Joseph Smith history. There's a story of his brother-in-law presenting Joseph Smith with a copy of Adam Clarke. We do not know whose copy of Adam Clarke it is, but we do know that Nathaniel Lewis gives it to the prophet and says, "I want to use the Urim and Thummim. I want to translate some of the strange characters out of Adam Clarke's commentary." Joseph will clearly not give him the Urim and Thummim to do that, but we know he had it in his hands. Now, looking at the text, we can say that a lot of the material that happens after Genesis 24, when we start to get to Matthew, it's very clear that Adam Clarke has influenced the way he changes the Bible. If Joseph Smith truly finished his so-called translation of the Bible and corrected what he claimed was only true as far as it was translated correctly, why doesn't the LDS Church officially use the inspired version instead of the King James Bible? Even the church itself hesitates to fully embrace this so-called revelatory work, which raises the question, do they trust Joseph's revisions at all? Fair LDS offers a weak defense, claiming the JST is not intended primarily or solely as a restoration of lost Bible text. If you're curious about their defense, I recommend checking out episode T on the JST translation. But let's be real, it's more likely the church doesn't trust Joseph's work, distancing itself from this fraudulent revision while still asking members to blindly accept everything without question. I won't linger on this topic, as I've already covered it in more depth in a dedicated video. If you haven't watched it yet, make sure you do. You won't want to miss it. Part 3. Take a load off, Fanny. We've touched on Joseph Smith's early mentions of polygamy in 1831 when he told Mary Elizabeth Rollins, but it wasn't until around February or March of 1833 that Smith took his first plural wife. Not Rollins, but Fanny Alger, a name familiar to many. However, what most members and investigators don't realize is that Oliver Cowdery himself was allegedly involved in this practice shortly after Joseph introduced the revelation to him. Church apologist Brian C. Hales, citing Glenn M. Leonard's book Nauvoo, A Place of Peace, A People of Promise, writes, in Kirtland, Oliver Cowdery knew of the revelation on marriage but was denied permission to take a plural wife. He proceeded anyway and engaged in an illicit relationship. Hales tries to downplay the event, arguing, a close look demonstrates that assessments such as these are not based on any contemporary evidence. Yet, we have damning accounts from Brigham Young, who accused Cowdery of either unauthorized polygamy or adultery. Young first mentions this in 1857, 25 years after the fact, when Wilford Woodruff recorded in his journal, President Young stayed 3+ hours in compiling his history. He remarked that the revelation upon a plurality of wives was given to Joseph Smith. He revealed it to Oliver Cowdery alone upon the solemn pledge that he would not reveal it or act upon it. But he did act upon it in a secret manner, and that was the cause of his overthrow. Young continued in 1872, while Joseph and Oliver were translating the Book of Mormon, they had a revelation that the order of patriarchal marriage and sealing was right. Oliver said unto Joseph, Brother Joseph, why don't we go into the order of polygamy and practice it as the ancients did? We know it is true, then why delay? Joseph's reply was, I know that we know it is true and from God, but the time has not yet come. This did not seem to suit Oliver, who expressed a determination to go into the order of plural marriage anyhow, although he was ignorant of the order and pattern and the results. Joseph said, Oliver, if you go into this thing, it is not with my faith or consent. Disregarding the counsel of Joseph, Oliver Cowdery took to wife Miss Annie Lyman, cousin to George A. Smith. From that time he went into darkness and lost the spirit. But here's the issue. Did Oliver Cowdery truly commit adultery, or was Joseph trying to tarnish Cowdery's reputation after being caught with Fanny Alger? Hales himself admits, this report is problematic in several ways. Numerous participants date Joseph Smith's first awareness of the appropriateness of plural marriage to 1831. Available evidence indicates that this realization resulted from the new translation of the Bible rather than the Book of Mormon, likely while Sidney Rigdon was serving as scribe. Even Richard Van Wagener highlights inconsistencies in Young's timeline. It would have been impossible for Cowdery to have been living polygamously during the period charged by Young, 1827-30. Cowdery's marriage to Elizabeth Ann Whitmer did not occur until December 18, 1832, in Jackson County, Missouri. So the real question is whether Cowdery was actually guilty of adultery, or if Joseph was scapegoating him for uncovering his own indiscretions with Fanny Alger. Let's wrap up this episode by diving into Joseph Smith's relationship with Fanny Alger, which I've covered in detail in a previous video on plural marriage, but it deserves a bit of a revisit here. The exact timeline of their relationship is heavily debated. Some sources claim that Emma Smith caught Joseph and Fanny together on November 6, 1832, while others place the event closer to 1835. Regardless of these discrepancies, what we do know for certain is that between February and March of 1833, Joseph Smith married the 16-year-old Fanny Alger with the assistance of Levi Hancock. Hancock's involvement in brokering this marriage wasn't without reward, Joseph gifted him Clarissa Reed as a wife, a clear transactional arrangement, as Hancock married her on March 29, 1833. This timeline is critical because it solidifies that Joseph's marriage to Fanny occurred before Levi Hancock's own marriage, underscoring the manipulative and orchestrated nature of these so-called spiritual marriages. According to Mosiah Hancock, writing in 1896, Joseph Smith didn't directly approach Fanny Alger about marriage. Instead, he enlisted Levi Hancock, Fanny's uncle by marriage, to act as an intermediary. Mosiah here confirms Levi's role. Levi Hancock first approached Samuel Alger, Fanny's father, and made the proposal on Joseph's behalf. The conversation, as Mosiah recounts, was direct and to the point. "Samuel, the prophet Joseph loves your daughter Fanny and wishes her for a wife. What say you?" Samuel Alger's response was a deferral. "Go and talk to the old woman, Levi's sister and Fanny's mother, about it. 'Twill be as she says." Levi then approached his sister Clarissa with the same proposal. Her response, "Go and talk to Fanny. It will be all right with me." Levi Hancock then went to Fanny directly and asked, "Fanny, brother Joseph the prophet loves you and wishes you for a wife. Will you be his wife?" Fanny's response, "I will, Levi." Levi later presented Fanny to Joseph, stating, "Brother Joseph, I have been successful in my mission," and then performed the marriage ceremony himself, with Joseph repeating the words after him. Some historians have questioned whether this was a legitimate marriage or merely an illicit relationship. However, Mosiah Hancock's account makes it clear that a ceremony was performed, indicating that from their religious perspective, this was indeed a plural matrimony. This account further cements that Joseph's relationship with Fanny was not an affair in secret, but rather a polygamous union, legitimized through Hancock's involvement and the approval of Fanny's family. Fanny Alger wasn't just some incidental figure in the plural marriage saga. Her relationship with Joseph exposes the darker side of Smith's early polygamous dealings, where favors and alliances were traded under the guise of revelation. In conclusion, the events surrounding Kirtland reveal a tangled web of contradictions, deceptions, and opportunism in the early history of the Church. From Joseph Smith's adoption of the word of wisdom, influenced more by external pressures than divine revelation, to the misrepresented Joseph Smith translation, and finally, the complexities of early plural marriage involving figures like Fanny Alger and Oliver Cowdery, each story further uncovers a deeply flawed narrative. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day.